Hello everyone. Before we get started with the next video, I need to make a correction to a mistake I made in my last video, the Q&A session. In that video, someone asked me who created my model, and I was a big dum-dum and didn't even mention who created the Hopkin base, which is Hobart. They are an amazing artist, an amazing creator. They've made so many wonderful avatars and models throughout the years, and you guys should definitely check them out. I've been using the Hopkin ever since it was released. I love it. They've made so many other cute ones. They have like a burb and a dragon and a doggy, and they're just all so precious. I'll put their Patreon link down in the description. Totally worth checking out if you want some wonderful, cute avatars. Please support them. They are just terrific. And with that, on to the video. How long have I walked these grounds? The seasons come and go while I remain unchanged. This body, everlasting, continues to forge forward towards a goal I have yet to uncover. Why was I brought into this world? And most importantly of all, why was I given this second chance at life? I had perished long ago in the midst of battle, fighting for the dreams of the people, my people, so that we may carve out the beginnings of a new era. Alas, our hopes were for naught. While our spirits were high, our numbers were too few. There wasn't a battle that day, only a slaughter. I remember the past so vividly it's almost a nuisance. The faces of friends and family long lost to the ages still pass before my eyes. While I have learned to cope with them, I still can't help but feel judged by their existence. Why was I the only one cursed with this new life, if one could even call it that? I am forced to live on in this body which is not my own, but that of a savage beast from the ancient times. A crimson visage whose fur was said to be stained red with the blood of its enemies. Alas, here I am, red as the sun with no victims to my name. I had no interest in slaughter, at least not anymore. I had had enough of war. I kept to myself all these years, taking refuge where humans seldom traveled. My current home is these ruins, or the old remains as the people now called it. Any evidence or knowledge of how its past residents lived had faded, but was not all forgotten. I was able to gather snippets of information from the conversations I had managed to overhear throughout the years from the various passers-by. What I learned was tragic. The land I walked upon was apparently still heavily contaminated from the weapons that were used during the Great War. This radiation, as they called it, cast a horrible spell upon any of those who came within its reach. Its curse slowly spread over the body and destroyed you from the inside. A gruesome fate I would never wish upon even my worst of foes. Fortunate for me, though, the body I inhabited seemed to be immune to its effects. If it were not for the scouting parties that passed through here, decked from head to toe in specialized clothing, to combat its effects, I would never have known of its existence. These small groups of what I could only assume were humans made regular visits to the area, visits that seldom went unnoticed. They were my only source of entertainment, after all. Each one of them wielded tools and gadgets I could not recognize, followed bizarre paths, and the most crucial of them all, always gossiped amongst each other. These folk were truly fascinating. I wanted to know what they were trying to accomplish, but that would require an introduction, one of which would be difficult to make through a muzzle. I feared I would go another few centuries before I dared to attempt such a meeting. But as luck would have it, fate had other plans in store for me. The day was much like any other. I woke to the sun peering into my abode, its light squeezing through all the cracks and crevices, much to my annoyance. This place was my home, an old brick building that had somehow managed to remain standing all these years. It was not luxurious by any means, but what sort of comforts would a beast like myself even look forward to? The walls were sturdy, the roof mostly leak-free. It was suitable. By the time I had risen to my feet and stumbled through my morning routines, the sun had already cleared the horizon and began bathing the rest of my home in warmth. I would step over the now fallen iron door that once stood guard to this place and emerge into the outside world, the ruins surrounding me on all sides. Desolate remains of this once thriving nation stretched on for miles, as far as the eyes could see. Toppled buildings, blocked roadways, and rubble everywhere you looked. This is where I spent my life. Every day was much the same. I would pick a direction, usually at random, and start my daily journey into the vast wasteland. Forgotten treasures, untold riches, and of course, the people who ventured into the ruins to find them. They were all so intriguing. The humans would often come at sunrise and stay late into the evening. The group that arrived this morning was no different than the countless others that came before them. They all seemed to follow the same set routine. Each would set up their equipment, pull out these awfully noisy devices for whatever reason, and then set off on their separate ways. I would pick one on a whim and carefully trail behind them, doing my best to go unnoticed. The last thing I wanted was to garner attention. I could handle anything a few individuals sent my way, but humankind is not so innocent. I knew the consequences would be dire if I were discovered. More so if harm were brought to one of their own. The hours would slowly pass as I crept along in the shadows, unnoticed, trailing behind my target for the day. This human, like all those that came before them, seemed to follow the same repeating pattern. They walked around, fiddled with their gadgets for a moment, and then adjusted their course. I could not understand any of it. They went on well into the early afternoon, with no real surprises for either of us. It was not until later into the day that things took a new turn. Over the years, I had come to realize these explorers seemed to have a set of rules they always followed. They stayed to the open, never entered any buildings, and did not venture underground. Of all the people that had explored these ruins during my stay here, I had never once seen a single soul violate these guidelines. Whether this was for their safety or it simply didn't interest them, I had no clue. Today, however, was different. I watched this yellow-clad individual cautiously approach one of the many entrances to the underground. I had grown quite familiar with the underground by now, opting to make use of it when I needed to travel around the city quickly, or if the sun was just unbearable on that particular day. This labyrinth, hidden beneath the city streets, was a collection of tunnels that stretched what must have been the entire length of the city. I surmised they were originally used to transport either goods, citizens, or perhaps both. Whatever its purpose was, once, mattered little to me. But to this curious explorer we had been following all day, it could hold the secrets they were searching for. They paused at the top of the steps, glancing between their tools that were now ringing louder than ever, and the dark void that laid before them, trying to decide if they should continue or turn back. Minutes passed until they took a step forward and descended, checking over their shoulder every now and then. Once they had disappeared into the depths below, I rose and followed suit, entering from one of the many other entrances scattered throughout the streets. It would not take long before I caught up, finding them only a few paces from the bottom of the entryway. They were not too hard to spot, giving their position away almost immediately when I rounded a corner and was met with the most obnoxiously bright light I had ever encountered. I hastily took a step back and slunk down behind a pile of rubble. Their pesky light was revealing even the darkest corners of the tunnels. I would need to keep my distance and do my best to remain silent if I wanted to continue to go unseen. Even the faintest of noises would echo for miles down here. Soon, though, after only a few mere minutes, it would become apparent that the need for stealth was not as important as I once imagined. The poor soul that had wandered down here appeared to be regretting their decision with each step. I could hear their breathing growing ragged as they somehow managed to stumble on even the smallest of pebbles. It was almost hard to watch as they made their slow trek towards whatever it was they were seeking. I continued to observe them fumble around in the dark for almost an hour before disappearing down a narrow hallway, a triumphant skip in their step. To say I was annoyed would be an understatement. I had attempted many times to wiggle my way down those halls, several times in the past, but would always back out before I got too far along. This beast was not a fan of cramped spaces. Instead, I simply took up guard near the entrance, a slight draft wafting the humans' all too familiar scent my direction. It would be enough to know if they were still present. Before I knew it, my eyes had grown heavy with boredom, and sleep had overtaken me. My slumber would not last long. A rumble would reverberate through the ground, jarring me awake before the entirety of the underground would burst into white. Overhead, what must have been lights flashed into existence, casting all but the smallest shadows aside. It was unnerving to be exposed so suddenly, but that feeling would only be fleeting before being overtaken by another. It was fear. The rumbling would grow louder and louder before I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral. A monstrosity of steel came barreling down the tunnels, awakened by whatever had transpired. I did not hesitate to put some distance between us, although I did not have to go far before this new arrival came to an abrupt end. Its path, blocked by rubble, caused it to stray off course. The impact was devastating. The world itself seemed to shake as bits of stone and steel started to rain from above. I danced around to avoid the debris as I sprinted for an exit, my mind in a blur. Perhaps this is why the humans seldom traveled down here. Perhaps this is why the humans seldom traveled down here. It took a mere moment for me to reach an exit, having done so many times before. Safety was only a few steps away, the light from above splashing across my face. But I hesitated, an act that would cause my life to cascade into more and more trouble. I turned back with a flick of my tail. While most of the damage had already ran its course with the initial blow, there was still bits of rubble raining from the ceiling. Hard to imagine a ruined city becoming even more of an eyesore, but it somehow managed. I ran to the hallway where I last saw the human, bounding over the newly placed heaps of rock and earth, to discover it now blocked with debris. I knelt low and listened, swearing I heard breathing. It was hard to make out with the now constant rumbling and sprinkling of pebbles from above. I had to make a choice. Even though the choice was already made, I dug, My claws ripped through the stone and steel like it was paper. It did not take me long at all to clear the path. But once the final bit of rubble was clear, nobody was in sight. They must still be further inside. Alas, there I went, into the cramped corridor, my head hung low and my body hunched down. I would traverse the hallway, snaking around several turns as I listened to the harsh breaths that lingered in the air. The breathing would grow more prominent before I reached its source. At the end of the hallway was a hefty door that looked as if it was forcibly cut open. The human's doing, I'm sure. Upon slowly leaning my head into the room, I was met with good news. Curled up under an old office desk with debris scattered all around lay the one I was looking for. They were honestly lucky to be alive given the destruction that had transpired. I waited and watched for a moment to see if they would make the first move, but I quickly realized their back was turned to me. I took one step, then two, but the third would be my downfall. A loud crunch brought them back to reality. Their head jerked around, and our eyes met. I could tell they instantly regretted their choices that day. No words escaped them. Terror was all that showed on their face. Our eyes were locked for what seemed like an eternity. I would make the first move, taking another step forward, closing the gap between us. The reaction was precisely what you would expect. They panicked and tried to scurry out from under the desk in fear, rising to their feet only to stumble and fall once again. Their legs had betrayed them. I did not blame them. I would have done the same thing in their situation. I'm not really the friendliest looking creature around. As I took another step, they would begin screaming at me to stay back, tears streaming down their face as they reached for their belt, looking for a tool that was unfortunately lost in the chaos. I do not know why I was so curious, but I could not help but keep my approach. As I drew only a few feet from them, their screams would subside and their eyes would clench shut, their will to live having been extinguished. I examined them up close for the first time, noting they were no different than the humans of my time. I wanted to know more, but my streak of curiosity would abruptly come to an end when a familiar rumbling echoed through the hall. Another beast was approaching, much like the first, I assumed. We needed to leave now. I looked around hurriedly as I nudged the human with my muzzle. They needed to move, and fast, if they wanted to survive the second time. The rumbling grew louder until I was nearly on top of us. I looked once more to the being in front of me, but not for more than an instant before everything went dark and the world came crashing down upon us. Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my first reading of the book Crimson that I hope to have published by the end of the year. If you'd like to read more of the book or listen to some more readings as I finish them, consider supporting me on Patreon. I will be releasing weekly content early for all my Patreon supporters, as well as a whole bunch of other benefits for people. It directly helps me continue to do the stuff that I'm doing so I can provide content to you guys on a weekly or even bi-weekly basis. And with that, I wish you guys to all have a wonderful day. And until next time, love you all. Take care.